All right. Pops, I think you have seen enough, said Commander Thomas Reed, his tone sharp and measured. This area is for active personnel only, he added, chin lifted, and a small crowd turned toward them with the sort of curiosity that tastes like judgment. Reginald Hale was 83, and he stood before the black memorial with the stillness that had the weight of a kept promise. His windbreaker was faded and close to falling into the pallet of the stones, and his thumb found a tiny silver bird on his collar. The pin had the dull shine of something handled for decades. "Did you hear me, old man?" Reed barked, stepping forward so his boots cut the pavement with impatience. "Be on your way," he said. And a neat ripple of laughter answered him, a sound that wanted authority confirmed. Reginald turned, and when he faced them, his eyes were pale and steady, the kind that look through noise to particular names. "I heard you," he said, and the syllables had no tremor, only the calm of someone who measures breath. Reed reached to take his arm, a brisk, corrective motion, and Reginald stiffened as if a cord had been plucked under his skin. For a moment the plaza fell away, mud clung to boots, leaves closed above them. Samuel Bennett's voice, half-remembered, whispered, "Do not leave me." And Reginald went as still as a man who had held a life in his hands and watched it go. The recollection faded, and Reginald relaxed into the present with a patience that felt practiced rather than fragile. He kept his thumb on the silver bird as if the metal itself steadied him. "You are not one of us," Reed scoffed, pointing at the pin as if it were a prop. "What is that, then?" "A trinket from a fair," he said, and the crowd leaned in to watch the game. "It was given to me," Reginald replied, his voice small and plain, and his thumb moved over the bird like a memory being stroked. He made no claim to rank. He made no boast. "Come on, then," Reed jeered. "If you were such a warrior, what was your call sign?" The question dressed as mockery. "Silver Sky," Reginald answered, two clean syllables that did not beg attention. The laughter faltered, and a few faces at the edge of the plaza went mute, as if they had glimpsed an old photograph they could not place. A petty officer who had been mid-stride stopped and folded his sandwich, as if he had remembered a name in a lesson. Reed tried to regain the room with a sharper laugh, but his voice came thin and the motion felt awkward in his hands. He had expected a punchline, not a pause. Reginald said nothing more. He kept his hands folded and held the small pin as if it were a ledger. The plaza hummed with a new, quieter curiosity, and the question everyone now carried was simple and stubborn. Who was this man when he had not been old? Something old had begun to stir. Reed leaned back as if he had finished a clever line, and the plaza accepted his triumph for a heartbeat. The sailors relaxed, the chorus of approval sounding like coins in a tin, and Reed smiled as if the world nodded with him. Reginald kept his thumb on the silver bird and spoke without haste, voice level and small. "It was given to me," he said, and the sound sat between the rows of names like a quiet fact that asked not to be argued. Reed barked a laugh that tried to be sharp and landed flat. "So what then?" he said. "What was your call sign, old man?" And the crowd leaned in for the punchline. Reginald answered with two words that carried no showmanship. Only the weight of names kept secret. "Silver Sky," he said, the syllables falling plain and steady, and for a moment nothing obvious happened. The words Silver Sky fell between them like a summons, and the plaza stopped laughing. A petty officer at the back froze, sandwich forgotten, and his face drained as if someone had read an old note aloud. A lieutenant folding papers let the list close, and a petty laugh cut off in the throat of a corporal. The mood bent, curiosity tilting toward a different axis, as if a second story had slid beneath the first. Reed tried to reclaim the room with bravado, but his words came thin. He repeated the question like a man on a stage with no audience, and Reginald only folded his hands and watched. At the edge of the plaza, a man in a plain suit had halted, his hand tightening on a briefing folder. He had the look of someone who had once read files, not for public eyes, the paper in his grip suddenly heavier. Someone muttered coincidence, and another shook their head as if remembering a photograph. The crowd quieted, not because they knew, but because a small wrongness had settled among them. Reed felt the change before he understood it, a pressure under his ribs that was not physical, but shame beginning to collect. He glanced to Reginald and found no performance, only a steady man with a small silver bird and a patience that would not be baited. Reginald said nothing more. He kept the memory like a letter folded in his pocket, and in that silence the plaza listened. The simple question tightened into an ache. Who was he when he had not been old, and why did the name make men stop? A petty officer squared his shoulders, remembering an instructor's voice. A junior sailor who had joked pressed his lips and stared at the paving. Reed's smile thinned, fingers flexing at his sides. He had expected a punchline, not a pause that felt like a hole opening, and the silence cut him sharp. The man in the suit adjusted his grip on the folder and met no eye. A corporal whispered they had a report, and the phrase moved slow because it required belief. Reginald kept the silver bird like a folded letter, metal holding a history no one had expected. A figure at the rear broke ranks and moved with a speed that did not suit his gait, and Admiral William Harcourt cut through the plaza. He carried a folder as if it were a map folded too many times, and his face showed a thing that could not be papered over by protocol. Harcourt stopped 2 paces away and did not wait for ceremony. He looked at the man in the windbreaker as if someone had handed him a long missing page. Reginald met his gaze, and the 2 men read a map between them. Pages of memory pressed flat. The plaza inhaled, and the small noises died, leaving a hush that felt like a held breath. Reed took a step back, the neat armor of his confidence slipping where a new fact had entered the room. Admiral Harcourt spoke low. "William, is it really you?" And the syllables landed like a key in an empty corridor. Reginald answered William, and the sound between them carried decades of missions and names that had been kept in private ledgers. Admiral Harcourt's face changed as if a chapter in a book had been found, and the man called Silver Sky was suddenly no longer a footnote, but the whole story. The plaza shifted. Laughter turned into silence because history had walked into the square and refused to explain itself. Harcourt reached and took Reginald into a quick, unstudied embrace, a clasp that spoke of trust forged in places men were taught not to name. The contact stunned the younger officers, and a petty officer let his sandwich fall, the small act a witness to a larger shock. Someone at the back said the records had him listed KIA in '68, and the phrase moved bluntly through the crowd. The man in the plain suit closed his folder and looked suddenly small, the paper in his hands heavier than before. Reed felt the ground slip under his feet, a private vertigo that came from being wrong where he had been loud. He had prepared a correction, a public lesson, but the moment rewired itself into something older and more exacting. Harcourt turned and issued an order that sounded like both duty and apology. "Bring him with me, not for fuss, but so the men know." The command rearranged the plaza into a different geometry, respect arriving without ceremony, because the man at its center asked for none. Reginald allowed Harcourt to guide him, his thumb resting on the silver bird as if the metal were a small compass. They walked away together, step by measured step, and the memorial names watched them like witnesses. Reed stayed and watched them go, the uniform suddenly a borrowed suit that did not fit the new truth. He felt the hollow where his certainty had been, and he held a question that would not be shrugged off. Who had he been mocking, and what was he to become? The man in the suit folded his folder and walked off toward the office. Reed's reckoning would be private, a ledger he must balance. Harcourt escorted Reginald through a side gate with a quiet firmness, his hand at the old man's elbow more courtesy than ceremony. Men parted without fuss, faces folding back into duty as if a quality had passed through the plaza and left an instruction. Reed fell in beside them at a short distance, the weight of being watched heavier than any uniform he had worn. He had practiced words to correct a civilian, not apologize to a legend. And when he spoke, the rehearsed lines felt thin. "Sir, I owe you an apology. Reed said, and the sentence was small and plain. Reginald looked at him with an economy of attention and let the apology land without dramatics. "You met the enemy inside your chest today," Reginald said, the line simple and coldly precise. And it struck like a verdict Aldershot could not issue. The words landed on Reed like a reckoning, and for the first time he felt the full weight of what he had done. Reed swallowed and tried to shape action from shame. "I am sorry," he said, and the apology was honest but insufficient. He needed a way to make it true by work rather than words. Around them, officers shifted into practical minds, not into gossip. A sergeant proposed a rota to tend the memorial, small tasks done regularly, and a corporal suggested a discreet letter to next of kin so families might not be surprised by attention. Harcourt accepted the suggestions with the economy of command that also carried care. "Commander, report to my office at 1400, he said, and the instruction read, as discipline framed by purpose, rather than theatrical punishment. Reginald declined ceremony with a short, steady line that reshaped the moment. "No fuss," he said, and the refusal was final. The day belonged to the names on the wall, not to the man before them. His thumb stayed on the silver bird, as if the pin were a private ledger. Then Reginald gave a detail that sharpened the grief into human terms. "My grandson is on that wall. Elliot Hale," he said, and the admission turned carved letters into a family and made the memorial intimate in a way the program had not intended. Harcourt's face tightened and smoothed into obligation. He ordered family contact and gentle accompaniment, not a headline. The aide moved with practiced care, arranging names and quiet visits, converting shock into service. Reed felt a small resolve form where humiliation had lodged. He began listing duties in his head visits, watches, maintenance concrete acts that might show contrition and change command culture by steady example. Reginald prepared to leave, his steps deliberate and sure, a man who carried weight without needing to show it. He offered a single instruction before boarding the car. "Keep them safe," he said, and the sentence set a task rather than issued a sermon. Reed answered, "I will," and the sound carried a steadiness he had not yet earned but might build. The plaza quietly turned from spectacle to stewardship, men folding into low-voiced tasks that would tell the story again through action. As Reginald and Harcourt disappeared out of sight, the silver bird remained in the minds of those left. Not a badge to boast, but a small account to be tended. Reed touched his breast pocket where the apology lived, and the ledger he would keep began with that first honest entry. Harcourt guided Reginald to the staff car with a quiet insistence, the Admiral's hand at the old man's elbow steady and sure. They moved without ceremony, officers stepping aside as if an order had been given in a language older than rank. An aide came forward and spoke in low tones about family contact and discreet arrangements. And Harcourt accepted the suggestion with the economy of command that carries care. Reginald touched the silver bird on his collar with a thumb that knew small rituals, and he said nothing of pomp. Reed walked a pace behind them, fingers pressed into his palm as if testing steel for strength. He kept his chin down and then cleared his throat, the rehearsed words from the plaza feeling like paper in his mouth. "Sir, I will make it right," Reed said, and the sentence was a pledge, not a plea. The words hung between them, and Reginald regarded him with a look that measured intent, not feeling. Harcourt assigned a task that read like both discipline and repair. "Commander, report to my office at 1400, he said, and the order carried the weight of consequence, wrapped in a chance to act. Reginald declined fuss with a single, steady line that redirected the moment. "No fuss," he said. And the refusal did not shut warmth out. It kept the day for names and not for headlines. His thumb rested on the pin as if the metal itself were a ledger. An NCO stepped forward with practical proposals, a rota to tend the memorial and quiet visits to families. And the suggestions were small labors of respect. Men nodded. The plaza folded into work like a tide turning toward shore. Reed sketched a list in his head, and the shape of apology became visible as action. He would do visits. He would stand watches. He would ensure the wall was tended. The duties felt like honest stitches rather than statements. Reginald allowed Harcourt to escort him to the car, his steps practiced and sure, and he offered a brief instruction before he climbed in. "Keep them safe," he said, and the words were an imperative that felt more like charge than counsel. Reed answered, "I will," and the sound had a steadiness that was not yet proof, but was the first act of repair. The plaza shifted from spectacle to stewardship, men taking on tasks that would tell the story again through care instead of applause. As the staff car pulled away, Reginald gave a small half-smile to those watching. An acknowledgement, and nothing more. "Tell them to remember the quiet ones," he said, and the line landed as an order they could keep. Reed stood with his hand to his chest, where apology and promise met, and he felt the ledger open with its first honest entry. The silver bird would no longer be a curious pin, but a small account to be honored, and the work of remembrance would begin in steady, unseen ways. "Tell them to remember the quiet ones," Reginald said. So here we are, remembering. If this story settled into you the way it should, do what needs doing, subscribe, share it with one person, and carry the lesson forward. No fuss, just action. That's the covenant we keep.